Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. I think that indeed that it was said, coming from the experience of this morning, I was sitting next to Anna Abram, and we were just saying, how much strength and hope was coming from the interaction with Pope Francis. I think that again, no better way to start the second part of our reflection, and indeed bringing the world of work into our equation. It was already there implicitly, but we want to bring it, more on the forefront, and also in terms of really making sure that we talk about all workers, the world of work, the universality of that, and the universality of rights that we also felt in the Pope's speech. Because I'm Italian, I was also lucky to hear more than probably most of you the remarks of Cardinal Ravasi when introduced our group to the Pope. And, I was particularly struck by, his definition, especially when we talk about technology, where he said to the Pope, we have a bulimia of means and an anorexia of goals. I found it very beautiful, and I think that it's also, a reflection for us to bring further and to see where instead, linking again to the demand of Cardinal Turkson at the beginning to link our reflection to discernment and, just to, make sure that we link this to the reflection on the common good. Of course, I'm not, coordinating this session because of my poor own means, but because also I work for the ILO. And you know that the Universal Labour Organization this year has its centenary year, but it's also the important thing is that it's linking rights at work together with tripartism, with dialogue, another word that has come very often already in our reflection. I don't want to enter too much in, in this. I want the colleagues to speak, but again, I want to make sure just to give a hint of something that was in our declaration of the centenary year. It's like where we linked again, the three themes of social justice, democracy, and lasting peace. And I think already what we were discussing yesterday afternoon with the peace and the democratic paradigm that also came yesterday links very well also with the topic of social justice, access to rights, and, a world of work that is for indeed everybody. So I stop here, we'll re-interact later on, but I'm also pleased that we also decided to have the same structure of the debate like before, just so the colleagues have accepted to reduce a little bit their intervention in order to have a discussion and then eventually to continue indeed in the various format later on. I'm also not introducing specifically, because of time, all my three wonderful colleagues that have been preparing since yesterday. Everybody has changed the speech after the Pope's audience, so this is very good. We listen to each other, and especially we listen to the Holy Father. Aziz Ahmad, you are the first one to go, and, stick to your 10-15 minutes as you have promised. Absolutely. An Italian asking to stick to the time, imagine.
Thank you very much, and it's quite an honor to be here, and we are really, as Anna said, super excited to and pumped up this morning to see His Holiness, meet His Holiness Pope. Without further ado, I would like to get to these few slides very quickly, just to see, to start where we all began. First Industrial Revolution, Second Industrial Revolution is all in the slides, and Third Industrial Revolution is where the computer and automation started. But Fourth Industrial Revolution, where we we have the human and machine interaction. And it kicked off, so here we are today. We're going to discuss how we can really hit hard on what are the disruptions, what we have been doing to address that, and also some of the framework that's with. I'll go, as I promised, very quickly with these are some of the data points. Most importantly, one said is 65% of the students, primary school students, elementary students here today, they don't have their skill. The jobs doesn't exist yet. So that's the major concern. But we have, I can give you enough examples that is not to worry about. Why is not there is a part of the evolution that is happening, and we just need to be all proactive and address the issues together. With that, we have, so here I'd like to highlight what is the job today. Job today our job was yesterday, one single job, one family, and very much 9 to 5. But today is with the advent of internet, with the smartphones, is really 7 by 24 jobs. And one person, but one person, multiple jobs. In terms of this is the trend we are not really confined with the one job, so we can have secondary jobs like Uber. In New York City, there are so many teachers or others, and they have two jobs. They are doing 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 schoolings, and they are driving Ubers as well. So you see the trend shift from the single jobs to multiple jobs. That's what I would like to get from there. And the threat. So is the threat with the all kind of fourth industrial revolutions in terms of artificial intelligence, robotics, and others. So we'll talk about that in the framework in the interest of time. So here I would like to spend some time with all of you. It's not fully perfect. It's evolving, and this is completely from our experience and observation how we can have this as a balanced way to address these our challenges and opportunities and make it a very sustainable one. So it's a framework. So on the left side, you see that workforce readiness for future. And there's a cause and effect, as you can see, is a pillar. So 3 pillars, 3 circles on the left side. So we are engaged with either formal education, informal education, experiential education. So formal education like college degrees, community colleges, as well as informal education is with all the certified courses, vocational training. These are part of formal, informal, but experiential education like YouTube, like many other trade licenses that we have today, whether it's a platform-based or even short courses that we have, to make it more with the skills and upskills initiative that we are talking about the framework. So we have that, and we are also talking about diversification of the technology. So there is a STEM-based, non-STEM-based, political science. That's a different kind of skills, or business, different kind of skills. Technology-intensive training That's also, so that's the, for readiness for future works. We all need to come up with that one of the initiatives that we have. Then there are threat is just the skills that we're learning today is becoming obsolete a few months from now. I'm at Telecom, and I was the lead architect for AT&T 21st Century Network. So those days, whoever in the telecom industry, 25 years back, we had a lot of big, Lucent, Nortel, those kind of technology, tip and ring technology. It doesn't exist. It's gone from the face of the earth. Now we are talking about data analytics, voice IP telephony. So, but these are, we don't have to wait for 5-6 years these days. We need to, it's about within 6 to a year, we need to learn new skills. And we are learning Java, PHP, Python. So there are skills that we need to always skill. Then the second, the top circle is future jobs, whether it's a human-computer dependent workforce. So even Uber driver, they have to depend on the smartphone. Physicians and technicians, they are all computer dependent. So I'm talking about, these are, from my experience, very basic technology that we know 40% of the jobs is going to be all artificial intelligence-based, machine-based by 2022. That's there. But if I look at the very basic things, if we look at the entire entire global perspective, and from our experience that we've been doing working with the Grameen movement, is really we are looking at the bottom of the pyramid. We are looking at the who really need to have a small job, small employment that they can learn a basic skills, computer skills today, and they can quickly become a part of global workforce. They can quickly become with that human capital, they start earning that. And we have institution called Coders Trust. It's a global company. We have over 50,000 online. We created online jobs, and they are all over the world, but mostly in Bangladesh. Over 30,000. Every single day they are making over 10,000. They are getting 10,000 jobs. You are utilizing them, their skills today, and basic skills like designing logo, or building some applications, tools, writing this, writing that. So you see that shift of the global workforce. We are bringing those because of the smartphones and because of the computer dependency, all becoming a part of global force. And on that, we have over 600 coders. They can do anything very much what we would like them to see. So they're all over the world. We have thousands of students in Kenya, as well as Bosnia and Bangladesh, India. So so what we did, with our platform, we just trained them with some basic skill sets, how to do the Java programming, how to build this kind of applications, and with the mentorship program. So the program that we have, we call Get a Mentor, Be a Mentor. So we bring the interconnected infrastructure, so it's not a teacher-students or client-server type of relationship. We used to call them master-slave relationship. So it is a mentor-mentee relationship. It's very much flat, and they are working globally. We have thousands of mentors, and working at the bottom of the pyramid, to create the job and even the hand-holding to even get the job done. So that we see the success, and they are on July 25th this year, I visited Bangladesh and over 6 families came to me to thank me, to say that we are so thankful because our children, or one of the son, got drug addicted, and he's not doing drug anymore because he got trained. He got some coding trained, and he's working in online. You can call them freelancers also. So you see that we are at the bottom of the pyramid. We are making that with that very small initiative, but so impact we are creating, which is His Holiness Pope speech mentioned, to work at that human level. So I was very excited to see that, and so we are creating those skill sets. And then on the right-hand circle, then I'll be done. On the right hand, the last one is the resolution barriers for the future of works. So barriers is, so not all the job we can train them right quickly now, but there are barriers. How do we, so is all relevant. That's the other experience we have is all relevant. I'm a Bangladeshi American, so 35 years almost in the U.S., went to school in U.S., and born in Bangladesh and grew up till when I was 22, I left. So I see the best of both countries, or worst of both countries to some extent. So everything has a relevancy. With the artificial intelligence that we are teaching or we are learning in the U.S., I have over 200 plus developers. The people in Bangladesh or Kenya, they are not getting that. There are so many issues. There are the teachers and mentors not educated. But we are teaching them a very basic skill sets, and that's how they're becoming a global workforce, and thousands of them making an impact. So you see that they are making a difference. They are becoming the earner for their family. They are coming out of their frustration, not doing any drug, or bringing folks from the slums area and handing hold and holding hand to really how they can become a quickly part of global workforce. So there are barriers barriers are relatives, and that's what I meant to say in the future, for the future workforce. And with that, then goes back to diversity, inclusion, and also we, as the there are few things cause and effect. Women empowerment is a big deal for us, for Grameen. As you know, with the we are globally with the social business. We are creating circular economy. That's one of the initiatives we have. And the work condition improvement, that's part of that. Also future readiness. There's in a couple of years in Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, the factory burned and over 1,000 people died. Because of that, they revamped the entire standards and become a global standards today. So the work condition should be improved, and refugee inclusion also part of that. Over 65 million today refugees in there, and we've been also running a school or opening up in Rohingya in there. And women empowerment. I mean, 47.86% women. How we can bring them in the workforce. That's a shortage of skills. We have over 100 million by 2030 for special skills like artificial intelligence, robotics, and the health science and others. So we need to address that. And most importantly, we need to address these millennials that today they need to re-skills and up-skills. That's as well as the Generation G folks. And almost over 3 6.5 billion that's in the developing or poor countries. And so we need to bring some relevancy with that. We need to, as someone says, Spider-Man example, greatest power, come up with the greater responsibilities. So how we can be more inclusive and take into considerations and add value as a part of one society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aziz Ahmad. And indeed, I think that he brought us right in, just with the issue of not only skills, but also education and the links, the fast pace on which we also need to address the changing technologies, but also, well, and then we will have this conversation afterwards, when you were referring to the fact that the workers in your adopted country in the United States, we shouldn't take as a given that now they need to have 2 jobs. Before, one good job was allowing those workers to have family time. Now they need to be Uber drivers. Why? It's like, where are the rights of those workers, and also the rights to have, indeed, a human existence beyond work. But also, as what you were saying about bringing the countries of the South in the equation, and also empowering, certainly, those young people and the workers, but also how do we bring together also the rights at work? It's not a gift for having free work, but, just how do we make sure that is. And I think that Oliver is the right transition to that, since I imagine that he will look also into, a worker's role and perspective. Oliver, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you for the invitation, and also I think thank you from all of us to Pope Francis for our meeting this morning. And I actually want to start with quoting from his conclusion. And in his speech he said, "An ethic inspired by a vision of the common good, an ethic of freedom, responsibility and fraternity, capable of fostering the full development of people in relations to others and to the whole creation." I would translate this to the world of work in the following way: that working life should allow workers and their families to live in dignity. This requires an individual dimension, decent pay and working conditions, employment security, a career perspective, and this is important, and freedom from fear of not managing and falling behind. But there's also a collective dimension, the ability to shape their own working lives collectively, to have a say in their workplaces. My argument or my thesis, and this might be controversial, is that without multi-company collective bargaining, we cannot achieve the common good in the digital age. Today, it is actually in jeopardy. It is declining in most countries. We need a joint effort by the social partners, governments, society, including the churches, to reinforce collective bargaining everywhere. When I look at digitalization, the digital age, we all agree that it has profound impact, and Aziz was already referring to some of the points. I think the key point is society and the workforce is atomizing. We are basically losing our social collective binding together and become individuals. It separates individual workers from each other and fosters jobs that make it much more difficult to feel solidarity, or as the Pope said, fraternity. One example, one of our Danish unions did a discussion with platform workers. They were invited in, and they are working only on platforms, and they are actually cleaning, but they get their tasks allocated through a platform. And the trade unions were talking about solidarity, and the result was they didn't have any solidarity. They tried to basically auction off their work so that they actually had a better price for the customer than some of their, not colleagues, but competitors. So for us as trade unions, basically said, we are totally lost, it doesn't work in the platform economy. The interesting part and the light at the end of the tunnel was when those people who were interviewed left together the trade union house, one of them said, let's go to a pub and talk about our working conditions. And this is how you actually create solidarity and fraternity and working together. Let me look first at 3 issues of digitalization, which I think are most important. It's automation, AZIZ referred to this already, globalization, and the rapidity of change. In a second part then, I will talk about 2 elephants in the room, but I come to this later. So automation, first of all, the key point of automation today is that complex mental tasks, which have been performed in the developed world by mid-level white-collar workers, are disappearing. We see a polarization of the labor force in a high-end group of workers, which increases, and a low-end of workers that also increases. But in the middle, it is actually disappearing. And those colleagues in the middle, the workers in the middle, have been the backbone of the trade union movement. And I would also argue they have been the backbone of democratic liberal society as we know it, because they really have something to lose. When I look at high-level workers, they are difficult to replace for the employer, while low-level workers can even be substituted relatively easily as collectives. Here again, the mid-level jobs are those which can be replaced as an individual, but collectively, it is not in the interest of the employers. You can see this as a simple example. If you close a factory, the production stops. If you close a number of supermarkets, somebody will find another supermarket to go to. Polarization is also complemented by a decline in the size of a company's core workforce. So we really see a decline of the people who matter for the employers, because an increasing number of tasks requiring human intervention can be outsized or franchised. This brings about the growth of a second-tier workforce, characterized by precarious, hyper-flexible jobs without a permanent employment relationship, such as self-employed workers, contract workers, temporary agency workers, and crowd workers. We are seeing an environment where workers might have several employers at the same time and in short intervals, sometimes across very different industries. As an aside, services workers, especially care workers, have another handicap to defend their interests. While when a factory is closed, by industrial action, it hurts the employer in the first place. When a hospital is closed, it actually hurts the patients. And the same is true when you close down or the garbage collection in a city. And workers actually don't like this. They don't want to go against their customers. So there is a real handicap. We have some solutions. When we look at the more fluent labor market, we need a better definition of workers. Workers are still defined as somebody who is in a job permanently. We have to make sure that self-employed workers, contract workers, have the same rights as other workers we normally understand as workers, and this includes a right to collective bargaining. We also have to see how we can adapt the social security systems in countries to this multi-employer environment for workers, and there we have examples as well. I mean, artists for many years in Europe have their own social security system, which takes care of the fact that they are actually freelancers for most of the time. We should also making collective agreements generally binding for entire sectors, especially in those sectors where low-level jobs are prevalent. And also, and I think that is important, let's change the societal consensus on what the appropriate pay for jobs are. Is it right what a nurse is getting paid, or should she be paid more? And I think there we need to have a discussion, and when we decide, well, a nurse actually provides for the common good, she should be paid like a factory worker was before, and not some really a low-skilled job. And finally, public procurement, for instance. Isn't there a task for the state to say that if I, as government, want to have a supplier, that supplier needs to abide by collective agreements, just to encourage it? When I come to the other issue, the second factor, it's globalization. And again, white collars are most affected because globalization is happening against the background of IT-based tasks. And of course, as you know, when you work on the web, there is competition across the world. And it does create downward pressure, especially in developed countries on salaries and working conditions. And at the same time, especially large companies are less linked to a specific nation. I mean, it's not so, I'm a British company, so I try to do all my best and abide by the British rules. They loosen their link. They feel like some kind of corporate world citizenships, and they have no responsibility and obligation to anyone. And at the same time, the operations, of course, is organized transnationally as well. By contrast, workers and social partners, as well as labor regulation and collective bargaining, remains organized at the national level. So some solutions, and one good one is a French due diligence law, and I think what we need is really an obligation by companies to make sure that good working conditions, proper behavior towards workers is guaranteed throughout the service and value chain wherever a company operates. Second, what we should do is include labor chapters in trade agreements, and the ILO could play a role which also reinforce collective bargaining and make sure that there is no social dumping across continents, countries, because some have good labor conditions, others don't. And the third one, which is a role for trade unions, and AZIZ was referring to this, is doing collective agreements at the global level with companies, global framework agreements. We have done this with Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, and this actually brings value to workers. The third element is the rapidity of change. And what we see is technology is changing faster and faster, and it's actually not stopping. It seems to be accelerating and accelerating. And I think that is a challenge for workers and companies as well as societies. How can you make choices ever quicker in ever shorter intervals and with less knowledge about the world of work in 5 to 10 years? You have a problem there. I mean, just take the example of a worker who wants to invest money for his pension. If he invests in the wrong company, which is no longer existing, he has lost everything. So the risk is getting better. What I think to address change, and there again, lifelong learning skills plays a role, this is happening in the workplace. The changes are happening there, so what we need to see is to address it. And the best people placed to address it is actually the workers and the employers, because they are there in the workplace. So what we should do and foster are collective agreements, procedures where the social partners work together at the company level, at the sectoral level, nationally, to really address the changes that are happening so rapidly. So, now coming to the elephants. So, for me, there are two elephants in the room in our societies and our debate nowadays. The first one is workers as a collective, not as single individual. And the second element is sectoral collective bargaining. What we see is basically that it is not sufficiently discussed. And I think here in this round and also in others, we should pay more attention to this. So, when I look at workers as a collective, let me illustrate how this is getting actually not into the picture. When we look at legislation nowadays, and that is partly true for the trade unions as well, we are increasingly working towards individual labor rights because it's easier to enforce because we have problems with collective bargaining. But if you have individual workers' rights, you don't have scope for collective bargaining to have a solution by subsidiarity. For instance, working time law or minimum wage laws. Second one is a shareholder economy. Business try to address their social responsibility by having self-commitments or going to ISO standards. Again, collective bargaining doesn't really feature. This all shrinks the space for collective bargaining. And the third element is the consumer economy. What we see in that respect is that consumer rights are important, but consumers very much see companies as a black box. They're not talking about the company should and the worker should do something there, but it's rather about the company should deal with it, and we don't care how they deal with it. And what I think the right way for consumer protection is really giving the consumers the right to get a good service, but giving the workers the right to provide a good service, because in the first place, the workers will be on the side of the consumer and not of the company if you allow it to them. So, the second elephant in the room is, of course, collective bargaining. And why do we not actually use collective bargaining more often to deal with the problems in society. And collective bargaining, and I think there we come back to the Catholic Church and its social teaching, is actually a concrete example of subsidiarity. And that is basically where it originates. It was a development in the 19th century in parallel by the trade union movement and the Catholic Church. And as I quoted before, the Pope, a vision of the common good is an ethic of freedom, responsibility, capable of fostering the full development of people in relations to others and to the whole creation. Collective bargaining is a tool to achieve this in the world of work. Collective bargaining is important in another way too. Collective bargaining is about compromise among workers to find a joint position with the employer to have a compromise solution. And then trade unions have to sell it to their members. And I think this is important because in our society, with populism, we missed understanding that it's not about you. It's always about the collective. And a positive sum game is when everybody wins and it's not you who win alone. So collective bargaining teaches compromise, and this is a basis of democracy. This is indeed making a society work. Finally, collective bargaining and subsidiarity at the workplace only works if workers are organized into trade unions and employers into employers' association. Quite frankly, we as trade unions can't do this ourselves. We need the active support of all parts of societies, the churches, civil society, academia, employers and governments. There should be a clear undertaking by all of us. In our respective field of work, we will promote and defend social dialogue and collective bargaining. Let's make it an issue that is again in the center of public discourse, and where we are in a position to push for collective bargaining, let's do so. This is good for workers, this is good for society, and it supports our democracy, not only in our own countries, but worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver ROETHIG. Indeed, just to bring the elements of the automation, globalization, rapidity, but also start giving, answer, of course, from one point of view, but just the idea of bringing together, the idea of, it's not only thinking together, as indeed the Holy Father also asked us to do, but also to foresee where are the solutions. And the solution, and I go back to our ILO also philosophy and spirit, is indeed the dialogue where it was said yesterday, not everybody will be always in agreement, but we need to listen to each other. And in the ILO we say we do consensus. Consensus in the ILO means not that everybody agrees on everything, but everybody can live with what we came out. And so now I think it's very interesting to listen to Malcolm Wright, and again from a company perspective, and also, a vision of regulation, if I understand correctly from the introduction, and then have afterwards a discussion. Malcolm, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you also to the organisers for this great event. I really am honoured to be amongst such distinguished guests. I'm Chief Compliance Officer at a company called Diginex. We're based in Hong Kong, but actually we have a global presence. I wanted to actually just pick up on a couple of quotes from yesterday. The first one was, what is the one burning platform or product we could all get behind, such as human trafficking? Another one was, how do we think about technology to encourage better behaviour? And hopefully, what I'm about to discuss will actually help to present some of those two quotes. But to sort of set the scene, in the time that it's taken me just to say those opening remarks, about 15 new slaves have been created. That's equivalent to about the first 3 rows just down here. And by the time I finish, it will be more than the entire number of people in this room that have been recruited into slavery. So my hope today is not really only to introduce you to a particular blockchain project that my organisation, Diginex, they're a global blockchain solutions provider, is working on, but also to inspire those of you in the room to think about how your knowledge and experience can be applied to the future of work in ways that help people who need it the most. So today I'm speaking to you about modern slavery. This is a term that you may or may not have heard of before. encompassing such terms as human trafficking and forced labour. Modern slavery refers to 40.3 million people in the world today who are being forced to work against their will. Rather than locks and chains that hold these people, today they are being kept in work by debts that are impossible to pay off, threats of violence and withholding of their documents, like their passport and employment contracts, by managers that wish to control them. They are paid little or nothing for their work, and in many cases their lives become trapped in a cycle of exploitation for their entire lives. Modern slavery refers to workers in factories across the world who leave home to seek employment to provide for their families. These workers are tricked by brokers, often made to incur large personal debts just to secure a job, and soon find themselves stuck working in factories, beaten if they don't comply, being paid pennies to make the clothes and gadgets that we all buy. Modern slavery also refers to a systematic sexual exploitation of vulnerable people who are forced into the commercial sex trade. We live in a world where it's possible to rent somebody else's body for a few dollars for an hour. Many of these people are forced to sell their bodies through a system of debt and violence. Modern slavery refers to vulnerable migrant workers being forced onto fishing boats, working all day with no rest, and thrown overboard if they get sick. Many victims are young children. We hear of stories of entire families forced to work in mines to provide minerals and metals that make the components for our laptops and smartphones, and children going blind or dying from exposure to harsh chemicals. Modern slavery refers to people being trapped in work in supply chains across the world, from cotton fields to iron mines, nail salons to massage parlours. And this is not just in developing countries, but in developed countries as well. I could go on, as modern slavery affects virtually every industry in the world. The fact is, there are 40.3 million people in modern slavery today. The combined efforts of NGOs, activists, governments, law enforcement, and the public and private sector identifies and helps just 0.2% of all victims each year. This is a statistic that shocked me when I first heard it, and I'm sure it would shock you too. In a world where sending a man to the moon is old news and technology is advancing to unimaginable heights, we still have abused and exploited people in factories working to produce our T-shirts and trainers. Did that go through? Yeah. There is some good news, and that is the world is waking up to this topic. I work for Diginex, as I mentioned, a global blockchain solutions provider based in Hong Kong. Diginex provides institutional-grade infrastructure for digital assets, including exchange, trading, and custody. But we're also pioneering blockchain-enabled tools for corporates, governments, and financial institutions. Last year, we entered into a partnership with an NGO in Hong Kong called the Mekong Club. The Mekong Club works closely with some of the largest retailers and manufacturers in the world, looking to identify and develop new and innovative ways to find and stamp out modern slavery in their operations. Many companies have thousands of suppliers, which makes this difficult, but it's something that blockchain may be able to assist with. So, thanks to the Mekong Club, we learned that if we focus on factory workers, for example, we see a number of trends that contribute to people ending up in situations of modern slavery. We see people dealing with multiple employment agencies in multiple countries, often paying very high recruitment fees to get a job, getting into debt to do so. Often they cross borders. In many cases, key personal documents are taken from them by their employer to control them. Factories themselves will often use subcontractors to hire workers, so it's not always easy to see where the workforce has come from. Buyers and factory owners will try to control some of this risk by spot checks and audits, but these are heavily reliant on the trust to ensure that the paper copies of documents that they are checking, such as employment contracts, are actually legitimate. Overall, in the manufacturing world, we see issues of trust, transparency, and security. So we have turned to blockchain as a solution. At Diginex, we teamed up with the Mekong Club in Hong Kong to build eMin, an app that targets one of the most common issues in supply chains, abuse via contracts. The eMin app allows for a copy of a worker's employment contract to be stored in an immutable and secure way using blockchain technology. The simple user interface fits into existing recruitment practices, allowing a scan or photograph of the contract to be saved and once approved by both a worker and employer. Once this copy is approved, it is uploaded onto the blockchain through the eMin app with levels of permissioning to give access to people, such as auditors, for spot checks. This simple app combats worker exploitation in a number of ways. First, the worker can now have access to their employment contract at any time. It cannot be altered or confiscated, and they can always call upon this record if needed in a labour dispute. This copy can be shared between employment agencies, with any updates or changes permanently recorded. Selected data points, such as worker pay or actual contract copies, can be shared with auditors and organisations such as the UN. Aggregated data can also be presented to show the demographics of a factory, or even the details of multiple layers of a supply chain. This technology is being used by companies and employment agencies that want to demonstrate that they are giving workers a greater level of trust, transparency, and security. We appreciate that blockchain will not eliminate the fact that bad people exist, but what we want to do is to make it harder for them to profit. Yes, there we go. We implemented this technology in Thailand, for example, where eMin is being used on shrimp farms to help farm managers prove that all of their workers have legitimate and fair employment contracts and terms, and that they have access to their employment contracts in order for them to attract buyers. This is just one use case for blockchain technology being used to bring trust, transparency, and security to a world of worker recruitment. I bring you back to the figure of 40.3 million people in modern slavery. A dent needs to be made in this figure, and it needs to happen soon. By picking on employment contract abuse, we are starting with a relatively simple yet terrifyingly common problem. As the world continues to embrace blockchain and continues to wake up to this problem, we are excited to see how much more secure and transparent the world's supply chains can become. I would urge you to visit our website for more details on this project and to get in touch and follow our progress over the coming years. And just to return to those quotes at the top again, what is the one burning platform or product that we could get behind, such as human trafficking? We believe that this product can make a dent in that number. We can increase that 0.2% in terms of detection and being able to prevent. And how do we think about technology to encourage better behaviour? The purpose of this app is actually to encourage better recruitment through recruiters and encourage those recruiters. For example, if a corporate is to work with only recruiters that use this app, then it freezes out those bad recruiters and they won't have any business. So here we are seeing actually an encouragement through the use of technology to improve employment rights for workers. So I do hope this has given you some food for thought in terms of how we can apply blockchain to the context of modern slavery. Please do get in touch with any questions on this project or our work at Diginex, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Indeed, it was a very interesting example also, I think, because for most of us, to start understanding the use of blockchain, that we start a term that maybe for those that are really coming from technology world is already you understand everything. But I think that also what was very interesting in general for us, it's also the fact that you spoke clearly about, the fact that we need to go beyond. And I think that's what we are doing here, trying to connect the dots and also the supply chain. When you also spoke in your remarks about, forced labor, because, nobody would identify with the horrible, forced labor and slavery and everything. I have nothing to do with that. But then when you say rightly, and then the components of your laptop, those mines, just like, and then you start seeing basically what I was saying at the beginning, that, we are not isolated, we're not in a blockchain where all the rest is not there, but we need to be able to look at the world of work and all the workers from Bangladesh to Congo and with the mines and the rest, and find those solutions together. But, my panelists have been quite good, and I negotiated also my 10 more minutes. So I think that what we can do is that let's have 10 minutes for a quick remark or questions, and then before I go back to give them the floor for an interaction. And I see Susie that is there, but I also want afterwards, I see that Victor Baez, that is the Deputy General Secretary of the ITUC there. So I want Susie to start, and then Victor, please, and then I see another hand and another one. And so please eventually introduce yourself.
We've been allowed with 15 more minutes, Anna, so gratefully.
Good, good. Then the former trade unionist can get some minutes, huh? Okay.
So much. Thank you so much. My name is Susie Snyder. I work with a Dutch NGO called PAX. I work primarily on nuclear weapons, so it's fascinating to be part of this conversation, and my brain is on fire with ideas for application in my field. But to do that, I have a couple of questions. First is how to deal with concerns I've heard expressed about interoperability of blockchain across multiple platforms. And I've heard that there are developments that it's not necessarily readable everywhere. So I'm not extremely familiar, and I'd wonder if I could hear about that. And then second, I very, very strongly support collective bargaining. I'm very happy that that was brought up. But there has been this move away from it because of a lack of sense of profitability. So when we are re-shifting towards a common good and towards creating and building towards the common good, how do we re-emphasize the profitability of collective bargaining across the workforce? Thank you.
You are there with the microphone. Maybe we give the microphone to these two friends, and then Victor is in the other side.
Well, Anna, if you don't mind, yes. Let's see the people who wants to make questions, and then we set up. Who wants you to start with? I mean, first one. One. Then we have two. We have three, and we have four over there. Okay.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. My name is Paula Schwartz, and I run the World Data Economic Forum, which is also called the World Datanomic Forum. And my question goes to Mr. Wright, actually, because some organizations do not want to comply when it comes to transparency, also in terms of their workforces. And what I have experienced is also that it is seen as impolite when you work in data and you request information about processes of hiring, about people's rights. And so there is a problem in communication sometimes when it comes to different actors who really only want to solve problems for the company, for the workers, for the consumers. And then sometimes it's perceived as impolite to ask certain questions that are difficult to be answered, but also difficult to be asked. And I come from a generation where it's polite to be open and honest because you want to solve problems. And I encounter this problem that the other party perceives it wrong. And there I don't know what to do in order to help my partners to comply in a better way with me. And maybe because you have a very successful case here, you can aid me and you can help me a little bit with it.
My name is José Flau. I am a retired operations executive. I spend a fair amount of time in China. I love the EMIN platform. I think it's absolutely great. It's a great use of blockchain technology. But can you comment on the employment agreement? Definitely in tier 1 companies, you will find employment agreements. What about the tier 2, 3, and 4? What is the percentage of workers who have, in fact, a real employment agreement? And don't you think that an obstacle that needs to be tackled?
Do you think you're going to remember the question, or we have to go set around? 2 more questions over there, okay?
Thank you very much, Victor Baez from the International Trade Union Confederation. We gather national centers from the developed and developing world, both. So we fully support what our colleague Oliver was saying, but I would like to add something else, because the issue of the fact that the labor rights are being ignored systematically, and the official word is symptomatic, and we have to challenge that. First of all, I'll bring the G20 leaders meeting, which took place in the end of June, but the working group on employment and work took place in the beginning of September, and the Declaration of Osaka reflects that gap. The declaration is reduced to core topics of the presidency of the Japanese presidency, which is demographic change and gender equality. But at the same time, we are very much concerned about the gaps, the asymmetries in the world. We live in a world. And the G20 is speaking about the 4.0 revolution. But in the world, there are workers, hundreds of thousands of workers that are at the stage of the 0.0 industrial revolution. The Japanese government is speaking about the 5.0 society. And how many societies are at state of 1.0? So we cannot separate that of the issue of the technology. In the declaration, the commitment of the G20 to ensure the effective use of data, the privacy, the data protection, intellectual property rights, security challenges, but they are missing. They are omitting to mention the role of the digitalization in increasing inequalities. Instead, at the same time, they state that they wish to have a sustainable and inclusive society. The digital divides for vulnerable groups is recognized, but the north-south and the rural-urban divides are put aside. And those divides are very important to take into account, because how can we address the issue of migration? Shall the developed countries keep building walls instead of integrating the whole world, because there are no islands in the issue of sustainability. There cannot be sustainable societies inside an unsustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you. I was not here this morning and yesterday, so I'm sorry if some things have been said before. My name is Domingo Sugrañas. 3 short points. One, I think there should not be oversimplification about the process of applying technology in the world of business. There are big differences. I mean, there are some companies, of course, who are extremely successful, and you all know the names, in using digital technologies. But in many old companies, it's a big problem. It's a big problem of adaptation, adapting the business before using technologies which mostly don't really serve. They are not useful. They're full of mistakes around. And so it's not a linear process. That's what I want to say. And perhaps our attention should be on which are the criteria which business consider when they decide about a technological investment. And there is something to be said about enlarging those criteria. My second point is, I think the positive aspect of the new work situation, we can see it in our own families perhaps, is the proactive attitude. There is a new meritocracy where people successful are those who are not expecting gifts from somewhere. They are proactive, they want to do things, and they are prepared to do several things, as was mentioned. So that's also very positive. There is a paradoxical situation where migrants, in a way, are extremely proactive because they want to do something and they want to have a work somewhere else. No? So I think education has to think about that because, and also bargaining. And to my friend Oliver, I would ask later on, perhaps, how he sees that in a world which is completely different. I mean, I think probably protection can be thought of only for workers, not for jobs. Anyway, that's and my third point, just very quickly also, is I read in Monsignor Dufay's paper that there is a lack of patience in the digital world. I think I like the idea. And just for your information, in Madrid with the Fundación Pablo VI, Jesus Abenzuela and myself are involved. We are starting a seminar which will take 24 months, where we want to start from practice businesses or situations or hospitals where digital data, big data, are really being used, and in an inductive way arrive to the conclusions about governance of technology, which is wider than regulation. Just for your information, this will start and it will take 2 years. And we are in touch also with the Pontifical Council of Culture about that.
Thank you so much. And this indeed allows us to give briefly the floor back in reverse order to my panelists. If you are okay, I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes max so we can finish and have the coffee break and have some coffee too. Please, Mark.
Okay, I'll take a deep breath and do it all in one go. Susie, we'll start there. Hi. To deal with the concerns about interoperability, we actually took an approach as a company to be blockchain agnostic. So we will choose according to what the client needs or according to what the project needs, and we'll move from one to the other depending on what the needs are, because each blockchain serves different purposes. What we don't do is to put private data on blockchain, so this kind of goes back to yesterday. So, for example, in the case of the employment contract, we're putting the immutability, so we'll have a hash of the document or something that represents, that can prove that document hasn't been touched. So it's important to separate out the two. But it means that if we're doing that, then we can choose whichever blockchain is right for that particular project without requiring different projects to overlap and have to use the same technology. Paula. So, I think there's two parts to this. So, some organisations not wanting to comply with handing over data. I'll look at it from our perspective first and how we see this in the context of modern slavery. We are lucky in the sense that we now have legislation coming through, things like the Modern Slavery Act in the UK. Those kinds of things help to force companies to be far more open to prove, and it's to their benefit if they can actually demonstrate that they are. There's also a social aspect to this that firms are now finding that Twitter can be both their best friend and also their worst enemy in a sense, because people will quite easily go to Twitter if they're unhappy about the conditions they might have found or something they've uncovered about a company. So that social push is quite important. We're also finding that I've been speaking to banking partners about this project in the sense that if you can prove your supply chain, does that mean that you should get better banking rates or things like that? If we can prove that a certain area in a country, if we have enough data, is higher or lower risk of exploitation, does that mean you get better or worse terms for your banking? And then we also have a permission system, the important part, I think, which comes to the overlap of the work you're doing, in that we can look at who can see what data, and we can prove who has looked at that data as well, and that's immutable. And that's perhaps where it comes to the problem that you're having, in the sense that if you are having trouble getting data out, is it because of trust or lack of transparency so if you can say, well, you can hand it to us and we can prove who has touched it. And actually we have another product called Diginex Trust, which looks at providing just that immutability layer into any application. Then that would then sort of potentially help alleviate some of the concerns that if they give you something, it ends up in outside hands that they're not happy with. I think it's Jose? Yeah, Jose. So the employment agreements, yes, the tier ones, it's quite straightforward. We are working with the NGO looking at, particularly the smaller companies, how we can create almost like standard contracts or standard form contracts. So at the moment, there's some variability. I don't have numbers. But we are working with the NGO, and we have been discussing, actually, could we build a contract directly into the app that could be moved from whether it's industry or country or something to provide a more standardized way. Again, some of the drivers will come from legislation around modern slavery. So even a tier 2 company may end up working with a tier 1 or tier 3 with a tier 1. And as supply chains become more transparent, it may be a case that they are encouraged by incentive that if you don't use the app or if you're not involved in a transparent system or transparent scheme, then you're not going to be able to participate in the process.
Yeah, Susie, profitability of collective bargaining. I think there are a lot of benefits in collective bargaining. I mean, for the workers, when you go statistics around the world, if you actually are working in a company or sector where there is a collective agreement, your salary will be higher. So that is one very good point, actually. And for the employers, you have a level playing field. You know, you can't have people just trying to beat you on cost. And that is especially a good thing for employers who are ready to provide quality services, quality jobs, and really do good things. And we have this, for instance, years ago in the cleaning industry, industrial cleaning industry, where the situation was that the big companies came to us and says, we want to give good jobs and pay well and provide a good service for the clients, but we have all those cowboys out there who have bad working conditions, in the end provide bad jobs, but they're cheaper. So what do we do about it? So that was about getting us a collective agreement, and then also when going to other companies and say, look, these are the good ones, and they provide you a good service and respect workers' rights. But also, I mean, for the workers, I mean, we definitely have a free riding problem. I mean, trade unions want to have working conditions for all workers, that they are good. But of course, only the trade union members actually are the ones who go on the street and also pay dues for the trade unions. And what is very interesting, some unions have done a survey about the rights you get at the workplace in terms of your working conditions and what are the rights by law and what are the rights by collective bargaining. and especially in Western Europe, we were quite successful. So they tick basically all the boxes. It's a law. It's not something which is actually dealt with by trade unions and the employers, and they agreed on it. So I think there we have to do a bit more propaganda and promoting. And then a good thing is Romania. Romania basically has a threshold for being recognized as a trade union as at 50% membership. And for years we struggled to get over the 50%, and then we went to the company and said, look, we now want to be recognized. We changed our approach, and now we wait until we have 60%. The first effect is we can't be pushed back under the 50% limit. And the other point is when you have 60%, then the majority of the workers in a company is actually in a trade union. So it becomes almost natural to join a trade union, as it was in many companies 40 years ago. On Domingo, you're right. I mean, how can you actually make sure that we are just not keeping jobs which are outdated? And I think trade unions can play a role. I'm coming from Germany, from the Ruhr area, which is an old coal and steel industry place in Germany. And in the coal industry, there is no coal industry left. And there was a joint effort by the state, by the industry and the trade unions to see how can we transform the industry without actually leaving a total wasteland there. And it took 30 years, which probably doesn't really work anymore in today's time. But if the partners are getting together, you can find solutions which are fair. We maintain the economy of the region, but also basically make sure that the jobs continue in a way, that they changed in a process. It's not just, the job is gone, so please see for another job. And I think that is really an effort where everybody has to work together. If basically one stops in the process, the thing gets really difficult. And I have to say, for trade unions, the weaker trade unions become, the more they are against the wall, and then basically they don't have many choices to be cooperative. I mean, they basically have to fight their corner, and we have to bring everybody together. I mean, this is really this Catholic principle of subsidiarity as well. Let's solve the issues together because we want to create win-win situations for everyone.
Thank you. Just a general thought, how do we create the common good? I'm not going to go to the deep learning and artificial intelligence, what's happening, but technology in general is enabler. How we can just fundamentally, we are going through paradigm shift. We will continue to do that, but we can look at the fundamental learning and rescaling ourselves and looking at the problems. We are a job creators. How we can start creating jobs using blockchain, deep learning, all the new technologies in every sector, from the healthcare to medicine to education, telehealth. With the basic technology, we are spreading information, they have to wash their hand or brush their teeth every day is a basic health using the technology. So this is how we can collectively, all as a society, community, and town, cities, the entire universe, how we can find a solution to other, we can go up and lift up model through the enabling technology, creating jobs, working for us, for our generation, for our children's generation. So I'd like to express my thought process. With all the technology we have today, we should be able to take the advantage of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And what we will do is that we will indeed continue this reflection now in the working group. But just let me finish to say, indeed, I think that out of this, I want to bring back what I think his Father Keenan yesterday, yesterday morning was saying, let's focus on why we are here discussing, that is the common good. And I think AZIZ took it. It's like I think the exercise is not about, I will give you this because I'm good, I'm better, I'm more technological, I'm whatever, but I'm thinking, how do we make sure that, I think it was Bishop Tag yesterday that says there is a democratic inequality fracture in society, and we need to make sure that we heal that. And we are here in order to say also, let's listen to everybody, and that's what is coming through the debate. It's like every worker needs a dignified work, wherever he is in this, along the supply chain, as you say, or other things. So I think and also I like very much what we say, we need adaptation, no oversimplification, but, the sense of solidarity, the sense of building something, and no techno-determinism has come strongly, I think, from this debate, and will continue later on. Thank you so much for having given us more time.